This is a video I actually thought twice about making, but my gut told me to do it. I need to get it off my chest. After what we saw in an elimination game, I just had to do it. The harsh truth about James Harden. And before I continue, no, this is not reactionary, as Game 6 was already 3 days ago, at least at the time of this recording. If you go back to when I reacted to when he first got traded to the Sixers, you'll find out what I think of James Harden. Or, as you're watching this video, you'll find out if you didn't watch that video. If you're new here and you're a James Harden fanboy, just a warning, you're most likely not going to like what I have to say here, but I'm going to keep it 100. James Harden is one of, if not the most overrated star of his generation, and one of, if not the most overrated in the history of the game. No, my thumbnail is not clickbait, I'm dead serious. When James Harden was averaging 34 to 36 points per game in Houston, he really just took advantage of the softest rules in NBA history. He never had that competitive fire, and it showed more than ever in Game 6 against the Heat. But oh no, that's not the first time at all that he showed lack of care. That Game 6 was just a new low for him. Not only that, for when he was averaging 34 to 36 points per game in Houston, not only was he taking advantage of the softest rules in NBA history, James Harden's game was also always exploited in the playoffs. And we've been saying that the playoffs is where reputations are made, and it's where players' weaknesses get exploited. And look no further than James Harden. What's up, everyone? It's Nick. Hope you guys are doing great. If you agree that James Harden is a bona fide loser and think he's vastly overrated, if you want to spread the word, leaving a like would definitely accomplish that. If you'd like to consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell for more sports content, I'd greatly appreciate your support. Back to this video. We just all saw James Harden quit on the Sixers on national TV, but for those who have short-term memory, this is his third team in 2 years that he quit on. Just 2 second half shots and didn't even look like he cared. Sixer fans, if James Harden does come back next season, I don't blame you at all if you boo him every time he touches the ball for what he just did in that game. I would too. I'd definitely be disgusted with him. In fact, I'm not even a Sixers fan and I'm disgusted just from a competitive standpoint. This shot that Jimmy Butler made on James Harden, while James Harden was not even getting in a defensive stance, legitimately looking like a statue. Look at Jimmy Butler's reaction. He can't believe James Harden is really this lackadaisical. And you know how much of a competitor Jimmy Butler is, and he has all the respect in the world for me for that. But James Harden, I have no respect for him at all. Backtracking a little bit on how he quit on the last 2 teams he played for, he wanted out of Houston because he realized he can't be the best player on a championship team. He acted irrationally, publicized the fact that he was going clubbing without a mask during the pandemic when he knows he's not supposed to. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with enjoying the nightlife. I can't lie, I enjoy the nightlife myself too, but to let that interfere with doing the best at your job is inexcusable. And for him to publicize that he's going to clubs when he knows he's not supposed to because we're in a pandemic and we didn't want to have another shutdown in the NBA, just not okay in my book. Also, for James Harden to show up to training camp out of shape, throw basketballs at a rookie teammate, wear a fat suit during warm-ups to force his way to a super team that didn't even get past the second round. I understand Kyrie and James Harden getting hurt didn't help, but nonetheless, the Nets were a huge failure. Okay, not as much as the Lakers super team, but nonetheless, the Nets were a failed super team. James Harden quitting on them definitely didn't help either. Now, I am not at all on Kyrie's side either when it comes to the vaccine, but like I said when James Harden was traded to Philly, you should have seen things through because the vaccine mandate did get dropped and Kyrie did end up playing in the playoffs. So you definitely made a huge mistake by not seeing things through. But not only that, how you quit on the Nets then, while Joel Embiid is playing with a torn ligament in his right thumb and an orbital fracture. Sorry, I'm not the best with biology, so if I mispronounce that, feel free to correct me in the comments. I feel bad for Joel Embiid to go from Ben Simmons to James Harden, both guys who wouldn't shoot the ball in the fourth quarter of an elimination game. They're both losers. Now, as much as I've been very hard on James Harden during this video, and I'm going to continue to be hard on him, you know what else I think? I think the Rockets organization can definitely be blamed for James Harden's antics because they enabled him by not telling him no, just like a parent who doesn't make their kids grow up. Ever since James Harden rose to stardom in Houston, or really I think when they brought in Mike D'Antoni and they decided to go with the Morey ball mixed with Mike D'Antoni's system and have James Harden be as ball dominant as he was. They just let James Harden have his way all the time, and as much as Russell Westbrook frustrated me as a Lakers fan, Russ wasn't having it with James Harden always getting his way and not being serious enough. When James Harden was in OKC as a sixth man, he may have still done that flailing and flopping we've known him to do, but because he was a sixth man and only the third best player on his team, he didn't have the freedom like he had on the Rockets, so he didn't get to be so entitled yet. James Harden has had falling outs with all of his co-stars in Houston, although Dwight Howard was pretty stubborn himself. Then there's also Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook. It's not hard to see why Chris Paul and James Harden didn't get along when Chris Paul is that fierce competitor he is. And yes, Chris Paul is a choker too. I'm gonna be making a video on him pretty soon too. Dwight Howard, who we've also known to not be serious enough, and this time I think I am more on Harden's side because Dwight Howard wanted more post touches even though he really was best suited as a pick and roll player. But how their lockers were on opposite sides of each other, it was like some high school clique thing where players would only talk to one or the other between James Harden and Dwight Howard. So I think James Harden was being a little childish here too. But even though Dwight Howard was more in the wrong than James Harden, for James Harden to have falling outs with 3 different co-stars and quit on 3 teams in 2 years, that's a sign of a selfish teammate and a diva. Also, looking at his assists will not say otherwise about him being a selfish player. There is such thing as assist hunting for the sake of padding your stats, and James Harden definitely does that by pounding the ball so late into the shot clock to make his move, which is either attack the basket, step back 3, or drive and kick, which becomes very predictable in the playoffs. Listen to what Kobe said here, and boy did this age like a fine wine.
James Harden, of course, crazy streak this season. What do you think of what he's doing right now?
Well, I think I'm not a fan of in terms of winning championships. I don't think that style is ever going to win championships. But at the same time, you have to keep your team's head above water to win games. So you have to do what you have to do to win games, and he's doing that, right? Now, I think...
So are you saying you don't think James Harden and the Rockets, as constructed, can win a title?
Not with this style of play, it won't win, right? With one player dominating the ball. Now when you have Chris Paul come back and you have more movement to the offense, where you move guys around, where you're harder to find.
And Chris Paul's back, but you mean more in the...
Yeah, because listen, if you take one player, you put him at the top of the key, or you put him on the wing, and you're running screen rolls, you're always in front of the defense. The defense can key on that, particularly in the playoffs. And that's easy to defend.
Yeah.
It's easy to defend. Now, what he's doing is absolutely remarkable, though. And I think it's a testament to how remarkable it is because people are now trying to minimize what it is that he's doing. I mean, he's doing some phenomenal stuff.
So Kobe gave James Harden his props but kept it 100 at the same time. It's so true that you become so predictable with that style of play. And I remember when facing my Lakers in the bubble, God I missed that 2020 squad, Frank Vogel was able to game plan for that pretty easily by doubling him late into the shot clock because he knew James Harden likes to dribble late into the shot clock, and that took away James Harden's step back 3 and also made him commit 4.6 turnovers per game and only had less than 5 in game 2 of that series. The best scorers like Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant are able to make their moves a lot more quickly so defenses can't load up on them. The fact that James Harden uses up pretty much the entire shot clock has led to him being a choker in the playoffs. I got this from MJ2K's video. James Harden in his career in elimination games, while 24 points per game may not look that bad, considering he averaged nearly 30 points per game during his time in Houston, we expect better than 24 points per game in elimination games. Harden has also averaged 4.5 turnovers per game in elimination games. I know efficiency nerds don't pay attention to turnovers, but I got news for you. Turnovers matter. Also, 32% from 3 in elimination games. For a guy that has shot 36% from 3 for his career, yeah, we definitely expect better on that part too. Now, I've mentioned earlier in the video how James Harden abused the softest rules in NBA history throughout his years in Houston with all his foul baiting. Well, in the playoffs, you know the refs let you play a little more, and this is also from MJ2K's video. In nearly 1/3 of James Harden's playoff games, where he shot 10 or less free throws, he scored 15 points or less. So while in the regular season James Harden has been able to score in bunches even without free throws, The playoffs are a different story. You need to have more ways of scoring than just pounding the ball at the top of the key and either driving to the basket or taking a step back three. Not having a mid-range game makes you that much more predictable. And same with taking so long to make your move, allowing defenses to load up on you. Also, for James Harden's competitive drive, have you ever seen James Harden dive for a loose ball? Because honestly, I can't say I remember him ever doing so. That's a reason why I'll absolutely take guys like Allen Iverson, Reggie Miller, or even Manu Ginobili over James Harden all day. And I know that James Harden fanboys are gonna get pissed off at me for that, but I don't care. It's sickening enough that kids these days even dare to compare James Harden to Kobe or Dwayne Wade. Or Daryl Morey saying that James Harden is a more talented scorer than Michael Jordan. Get the f*** out of here. No, he's not. James Harden only looked that good in the regular season because of the softest rules in NBA history. In the playoffs, because of his play style, yeah, you heard what Kobe said. It's more predictable for the better defenses. The best players are supposed to elevate their play in the playoffs. James Harden hasn't done that in years, at least statistically, but even when he did statistically, he still never got to the finals. His team may have come back from 3-1 in the series before, but they did that in spite of Harden, as Harden shot just 25% in Game 6 and 35% in Game 7, while also turning the ball over 7 times in Game 7. Harden did get to shoot 18 free throws and knock down 15 of them in Game 7, at least that, but those 15 free throws he made were nearly half his points. Going back to how he needs free throws come playoff time. You know what else I got from MJ2K's video in Harden's MVP season? While I'm not a huge fan of advanced stats, those of you who aren't new watching this video know this about me when it comes to basketball, but I do think these advanced stats are credible. They definitely make sense. The regular season, James Harden's effective field goal percentage was 55.2% in ISOs, and in the playoffs, just 46.6%. That was the year Chris Paul missed the last 2 games of the conference finals, and that's supposed to be the best shot you have at making the finals. Chris Paul's injury is what stopped you from getting to the finals is really the best shot you ever had. Even if Chris Paul did play in Game 6 and 7, we'll never know if the Rockets would have won that series because Chris Paul has his own history of choking in the playoffs, and we just saw it again this year. Yes, Chris Paul did bail James Harden out in that Game 5, but we still don't know what would have happened if Chris Paul stayed healthy. If James Harden really was that dude, he'd find a way to at least step up and do whatever he can without Chris Paul, especially if he's the MVP. But Game 6, 32 points is nice, but on 10 of 24 and 9 turnovers. But more embarrassing than anything, James Harden scored 0 of the Rockets' whopping 9 points in the fourth quarter of that game. The Rockets were also up 39-22 after the first quarter, but lost that game 115-86. Game 7, again, 32 points, nice, but 12 of 29 at least. This wasn't what we saw in Game 6. At least James Harden did shoot 29 times. He only made 2 out of his 13 threes though, and was abysmal in the second and third quarter. Let's also not forget the year before when James Harden was an MVP runner-up. In the last game of that series, he scored just 10 points on 2 of 11. Just utterly disgraceful with the season on the line from your franchise cornerstone. Sure, the Rockets definitely did not have a championship team in 2017 as James Harden did not have a co-star. This was after Dwight Howard left and before Chris Paul arrived. But still, James Harden having a performance like that in an elimination game, no matter who's on your team, is inexcusable. Another thing I want to talk about is conditioning is a huge part of being clutch. I know from having watched Kobe my whole life. In his prime, he was maybe the most well-conditioned player. You didn't see him get tired late in games or in the playoffs. Breathing heavy after the game is over, sure, like in Denver where it's high altitude, but he did score 13 of his 41 points in the fourth quarter of that Game 3. All that ball pounding James Harden does just exerts unnecessary energy, and it doesn't help when you choose to be out of shape going into the season. It does look like James Harden is going out the Darren Williams route of just completely falling off because you don't love the game enough. I know Gen Z bots will definitely laugh at what I'm about to say, but I don't care because I'm not trying to appeal to them anyways. After MJ, Kobe, and Dwayne Wade, Dwayne Wade, and Clyde Drexler, the next 2 best shooting guards are Sam Jones, a 10-time champion who was great on both ends of the floor for the Celtics dynasty, and Joe Dumars, who was a finals MVP, a really good scorer who also made multiple all-defensive teams. I mentioned some of these guys earlier, but I'll definitely go more in detail now. Allen Iverson. Now, before you bring up efficiency, stop just looking at that. Allen Iverson moved so well without the ball. That's a skill of his that's criminally underrated. There's something called the Iverson cut for a reason. Iverson may have enjoyed that party life too, but once Allen Iverson stepped on the court, it was time to go to war for him. While I've legitimately never seen James Harden dive for a loose ball, or at least I don't remember, Allen Iverson went balls to the wall for loose balls. Iverson also did take a team full of defense first guys who weren't very good on offense to the finals and managed to not get swept by Kobe and Shaq. Iverson also turned the ball over less with a much lower usage percentage and with much less spacing. Here's a hot take for you. Yeah, I'd definitely rather have Reggie Miller over James Harden. Reggie Miller may not have James Harden's handles or stats, but Reggie Miller never ball watched when he didn't have the ball. Even before freedom of movement, Reggie Miller ran circles around defenses when he didn't have the ball. And moving without the ball is how you keep your offense fluid. How James Harden stands around without the ball, that stagnates the offense. Reggie Miller may not have any rings either, but at least he was a fierce competitor. Reggie Miller always elevated his play in the playoffs during his prime. He took his Pacers to 5 conference finals, he took MJ's Bulls to 7 games, and made the finals as the best player on his team. Reggie Miller is way more of a winner than James Harden ever was or will be. Or how about Mitch Richmond, who may have never made an all-defensive team, but he absolutely did play with pride on defense while also being a very good scorer. Sure, James Harden did get better at defense as his career went on, but it couldn't be any worse for much of the early part of his career, and nowadays, yes, it's pretty terrible. Ray Allen, yeah, I even went with Ray Allen right here. And the younger fans may only remember Ray Allen for being a shooter, but young Ray Allen was such a gifted athlete. And Ray Allen was also another guy who moved really well without the ball. Ray Allen does also have 2 rings, sure, one of them as a role player, and he may have not been the best player in a championship team, but still, Ray Allen is definitely more of a winner than James Harden ever was or will be. There's also Sidney Moncrief, a shooting guard who won Defensive Player of the Year twice, and okay, he won the award twice when the award was favoring guards more and hand checking was allowed, but at least he cared enough on defense to win the award twice, while also being able to score more than 20 points per game while leading multiple 50-plus win Bucks teams. The Bucks even won as many as 59 games in 1985 and followed that up with 57 the following year. Or how about Bill Sharman and Hal Greer? I'm not going too far, am I? I don't think so. I think only those who don't know the history of the game will call me crazy for that. Anyone who calls them plumbers and janitors already lost the argument by saying that, and they were great players back in their day and they were champions. James Harden can have his stats and his MVP award, but I want winners. James Harden is not a winner. Or how about a really hot take? Give me Manu Ginobili over James Harden. Ginobili may have never led an NBA team. Sure, only Argentina and FIBA in the Olympics, but Ginobili also never had an ego. Ginobili throughout his prime was easily good enough to be a full-time starter, but he was willing to lead the second unit and thrived. You play for Greg Popovich, you can't have an ego. Ginobili played his ass off and absolutely did his part for the Spurs to win their championships. I also have to give credit to the Spurs organization though, because they never enabled anybody the way the Rockets enabled James Harden. So there you have it. James Harden is overrated. No, my thumbnail was not clickbait. I don't consider stat patters who don't give their best effort on a consistent basis and constantly choke in the playoffs top 10 players at their position. Is James Harden a Hall of Famer though? Yes, most certainly. I'm not going to go that far, but James Harden is definitely very overrated, and let's keep in mind that overrated and bad do not mean the same thing. Next, we have the harsh truth about Chris Paul, so stay tuned for that. And if you're butthurt over the fact that I said James Harden is a loser and tell me that I should do better, you already lost the argument, because of course I can't do better, and by your logic, you don't have a say either. I'm just a guy on YouTube, and I'm just a guy who's gonna tell you how it is. I want the guy who's willing to give it his all. I don't see that in James Harden. He just simply is not a winner at the NBA level. He's an entitled diva and a choker who was always very overrated. Also, go Heat in the conference finals, or if the Celtics make their first finals since 2010, I'm rooting for the Western Conference team because I do not want the Celtics to retake the lead for most championships in NBA history. So that's it for now. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a thumbs up to help this video out with the YouTube algorithm. Consider subscribing and turning on notifications for more sports content. Links to my social media are down below. I'll follow you back. If you haven't seen either of these videos up above, you'd like to click one or the other, I'd really appreciate that. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.